Welcome to our webinar on toxicity in the workplace, of course, early years. So my name is Jared. I'm the founder of PeopleBunch. I'm also from the early years sector, so I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, and I know all about these problems that we're going to be discussing today. PeopleBunch is a software solution for early years, people management, regulations from HR to Ofsted, you're covered. But today, we're going to be zooming in on toxicity in the workplace, and our specialist today is Rachel. So Rachel is a pro in HR. She's been there, done that, and she's worked alongside early years for a long time. And we will also later be handing over to Sarah at the back end of Rachel's intro. Sarah is from PeopleBunch, and she'll show us the platform. And while this is going on, please use the chat. Put in loads of questions because there will be a Q&A, and in that Q&A, all your questions will be answered by Rach. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Rachel.
Thanks, Jared. That's brilliant. Okay, right. If you all just bear with me just 2 seconds, I've got some slides that I would like to talk through in respect of this topic. So I'm just going to share my screen with you all. So toxic culture starts somewhere. To prevent toxic workplace, we first need to be able to spot the signs. So if we don't know that we have one, or if we can or don't want to see it potentially creeping in, we're never going to be able to take that positive action or learn or improve from it ultimately. So when people hear, I find anyway, when people hear the phrase toxic culture in the workplace, they often imagine things such as bullying or harassment or a major disciplinary issue. But in reality, toxic cultures rarely begin with a dramatic event. I don't know if you want to use the chat box just for a minute, and can anyone guess what any early warning signs of a toxic culture might include? We can talk through some of these as you enter your thoughts, but high staff turnover is a big one. Increased absence is normally a really key indicator as well. Gossip, cliques, conflict amongst staff, poor communication. Yeah, thank you. Yes, high turnover and gossip groups. Yeah, gossip groups in particular is a big one. It can be a big problem. That poor communication and the low morale and disengagement that then can come from some of these things that we've looked at. Safeguarding concerns being dismissed or perhaps just not being taken as seriously as they should be once they've been raised by management. And then managers avoiding rather difficult conversations. So a poor workplace culture or a toxic culture is something that really does develop gradually through small behaviours that ultimately just become accepted over time. That poor communication just then becoming the norm. Perhaps somebody's underperforming and then they're not being challenged for it. So then you consider alongside that the impact that has on your stronger team members who become drained and lose morale from continuously lifting the heavy load. Negative attitudes spreading. So this is criticism that's given that isn't constructive. It's problems that are being raised without solutions. Your gossips and your cliques and your conflicts. So this, I've seen this arise a lot through sort of strong friendship groups, perhaps within teams, and then that leaves other, maybe newer team members that are in that group, so to say, feeling excluded. It can also be difficult where employees are, promoted, perhaps rightly so, in the basis of their skills, but then they find it hard to challenge their now direct reports who were previously their peers. That can be a right difficult conversation for them if they've not got the required skills and trainings to be able to manage that. Another really key example, which I find is overlooked, is breach of confidence and the impact that can have on culture. And what I mean by that is room leaders, supervisors, managers potentially oversharing personal details of other members of staff. Sometimes it can be around sickness, sometimes it can be around personal problems. And they do this without, intending any malice or any harm. But it does ultimately sort of break down trust and break down relationships, and it can be really hard to rectify then at that point. Favoritism, I think potentially linked to friendship groups or, other reasons as well. that can be that obviously will have an impact. Staff feeling unsupported, and then difficult conversations that we know we need to have, but we don't really want to have them, so we continuously postpone them, and then we find that matters escalate. So by the time you're at a stage where there's a complaint or there's a grievance, it's normally the case that the culture's often been deteriorating for many months before we've even got to that stage. And the manager potentially has even put themselves at risk before then, potentially subject to allegations themselves of things like bullying, of things like harassment, or quite simply not managing a situation effectively. So to build a genuinely healthy culture, it's really important that we are proactive rather than reactive in looking at this topic. And what I find is a really helpful starting point is to just ask yourself this question: what behaviours are we currently tolerating that we wouldn't want to become normal ultimately? And if you ask yourself that question, you probably have 4 or 5 really key bullet points immediately that you want to be able to go away and have a look at and have an address. And for early years and nursery settings, this is particularly important because poor culture doesn't just affect staff. It's obviously going to affect the children. It's going to affect safeguarding, parent confidence, potentially Ofsted outcomes, recruitment, retention. It eats into all those really important aspects. And it is 100% the case that a culture is every single person's responsibility, but ultimately it's going to be the managers and the leaders in the setting that set that standard, that set what they accept, what they challenge, and what they reward. So takeaway here is don't wait for complaints to come in and address issues, where as and when they arise. One of the biggest misconceptions is that workplace culture begins when someone joins. In reality, it starts before that. It starts at recruitment. Every single appointment you make is either going to strengthen your organisation or it's going to weaken it. It's as simple as that. So safe recruitment isn't simply a safeguarding requirement. It's a cultural protection exercise for your setting as well. And good recruitment should include things such as clear job descriptions and person specifications. It should include consistent interview process that has objective selection criteria, applying that to that same criteria across all candidates, structured interviews, consistent questioning, proper note taking, and getting to understand the person's values as well as their competence in their role. So before advertising, ask whether the job description that you're using is genuinely up to date. Does it reflect the role that you need someone to perform now? And many organisations and businesses are very guilty of this. Is it an old job description that's been recycled and rehashed over the years? And actually, is it effective for what we're looking for now in today's market? You need a clear job description for obvious reasons. Helps candidate understand the role, the standards expected, and ultimately whether the setting's right for them as well. And think about your interview process as well. It's not a tick box. It should test more than that individual's technical ability. We should consider whether the questions you ask actually help you understand that person's values, that person's communication style, their approach to safeguarding, their attitude to teamwork, their ability to respond under pressure. So it's not just about filling that rota gap. It's about appointing someone, like I say, that's going to strengthen your culture. And that could even form part of the interview process itself. It can be one of the questions. For example, our strong, positive workplace culture is essential to our success. How will you contribute towards that? How will you help us strengthen that culture? And this is becoming increasingly important. So UK workforce and recruitment research is constantly showing us that yes, pay matters, of course pay matters, but it's not the only factor that candidates consider. They look for clear progression, they look for learning and development, they look for work-life balance, supportive leaders, a healthy culture. All these types of things are really important in today's recruitment market. This is what the good candidates are looking for. And in an early years setting, it's about presenting that role professionally, being honest about expectations, showing what support and supervision will be available, and explaining how good, strong performance will be recognised, and making your setting feel like somewhere people can grow and be respected and ultimately do really meaningful work. That's what people want when they come to work, isn't it? So yeah, of course, we've got your other important and necessary recruitment steps. So your references before employment starts, your right to work checks in respect of every employee before employment starts, DBS and safeguarding checks, qualification verification, and ensuring that your recruitment decisions are properly documented. You need to be able to demonstrate why you've selected one person over another ultimately, and that was a fair selection process. One point I would like to note on this is that managers, recruiters should resist making recruitment decisions simply because they're short-staffed. And I know that's easier said than done. And I know that we're all under a lot of commercial pressures, particularly within early years. But employing the wrong individual can be significantly more expensive than leaving a vacancy open for a short period of time. So sometimes using agency or bank staff, overtime or temporary internal cover is going to be a safer commercial decision than rushing recruitment. And of course, it doesn't just end at recruitment. A clearly defined induction process helps set expectations from the offset. That process should include a clear explanation of the relevant policies and procedures, not just please sign here to show that you've received them, and ensuring that that person's got the right support in place from the offset. So think about things such as buddy systems or mentor systems, regular weekly check-ins to help embed expectations and provide the early support. And then probationary periods as well. It's not a HR to-do list, it's not a tick box exercise, but it's really meaningful and really helpful to get that person where they need to be and ensure that they can make a really valid contribution to your setting. So we touched upon, I think, at the beginning, one of the biggest contributors to a toxic culture is delayed management. We can sometimes take action soon enough and simply hope that, surely this is going to improve over time, it'll get better, and then things continue. And unfortunately, things rarely improve. Instead, what happens is other staff start to notice and questions start being asked. Why is nobody dealing with this? And that damages confidence then in leadership. So instead, and in addition to those things we discussed, so yes, your inductions and yes, your probationary periods throughout the employment relationship, you want to be building in and making time for your regular reviews and prompt informal conversations. You want to be really clear when setting your expectations. You want to document this, even the informal discussions. It doesn't have to be war and peace. We don't have to go into reams of details, but just a quick note to document that you've spoken to so-and-so about something. And provide that early, honest, objective feedback. As I say it out loud, it sounds time consuming. It's really not. These are the little quick day-to-day conversations that would naturally happen as part of the working environment, which can save significant time in the longer term and prevent these small day-to-day issues becoming a big problem that then needs managing formally under a performance management plan or something similar. That then becomes time consuming. So being proactive in taking these steps can really help in the longer term. And it's just starting your sentences with things such as, I've noticed XYZ, or can we talk about XYZ, or can I help you improve this? And keeping that conversation going. And the key message is that good managers deal with concerns through those regular informal conversations rather than waiting for things to build up. And when we're having these conversations, it's going to be really important to focus on the behaviour or standard that needs to improve and not the person's character. Feedback should never feel like a personal attack. It should be delivered calmly. It should be factual, no knee-jerk reactions, no jumping to conclusions, and make sure you've got your ducks in a row. And it should be clear in terms of expectations, excuse me, in regards to what needs to change and what support is available. And to help with achieving that, have a think about before holding those conversations, your timing, your own tone, your own body language, because if you're going into a conversation feeling frustrated or visibly annoyed, your team member is absolutely going to pick up on that, and the conversation is going to potentially become defensive rather than constructive, and it sort of takes away the benefit of it. So always going in that sort of calm way, ready to discuss the outcomes we're looking for and how that can be achieved. One final tip on this point. is around the language you use to help support some of these informal conversations. It's all well and good me saying, yes, speak to people early, but if we're not having these conversations in the right way, it's not perhaps always helpful. So I think it's always worth mentioning that we should really try and be clear and objective in our language. And language such as, do you know what, your attitude was really poor today, or you were lazy, or I need you to do more, are not always helpful, because they're open to interpretation and they can feel a little bit personal. So instead, you want to try and describe the behaviour that you've observed specifically and the standard required. So an example could be, I've noticed handover notes have been incomplete on 3 occasions this week. From tomorrow, I need each handover to include meal, sleep and a parent message, for example. Or to go back to the you need to be more proactive suggestion, perhaps instead we would be more specific and say, okay, when children have finished a snack, I need you to move straight into the next activity without waiting to be asked. Or if there's a negative attitude and you want to have a conversation with somebody about that, again, go back to the specific scenario that give you that view. So during team discussions, I need concerns to be raised constructively and with suggestions about how we can move forward. So it's that type of level of detail that can really help. As I say, document the discussions. They can be quick file notes. These aren't disciplinary records and they shouldn't be labelled as such. They're simply just evidencing the expectations that are being explained and the support offered. And then if that isn't work, if that isn't sufficient, at that stage, then you can look at more formal action. So setting performance objectives, putting support plans in place, and, perhaps getting some HR support around building that and what that should look like. Final point, I wanted to touch upon conduct versus capability. Conduct is where somebody chooses not to do something or chooses not to follow a set standard. Capability is where somebody can't achieve the required standard despite support. So the processes for these two concerns are different, but they both require fairness and they both require documentation, and it's important not to ignore either. Protecting your culture when somebody isn't the right fit. It is the case that not every appointment will work. Despite your best efforts, despite good recruitment and inductions and everything else, ultimately, sometimes somebody, might not be the right fit. Sometimes their values might not align, their capability doesn't improve, and their behaviour continues to be a problem despite support. I would suggest that we shouldn't avoid making decisions around dismissal because they feel uncomfortable, okay? So keeping somebody in post who is constantly undermining standards can have a much greater impact on morale, on safeguarding, on retention and on service quality than we perhaps like to consider. And ultimately, where support's being provided, expectations have been made clear and fair, procedures have been followed, dismissal may be the appropriate outcome. If that is the case, you should always ensure that you are following your procedures, including relevant disciplinary policies. Or, for example, if the concern relates to sickness, have you followed your absence management policy to include, for example, use of tools such as the Bradford factor? I don't know if anybody uses that already, but it can be a really helpful tool to monitor and manage sickness absence in a fair and consistent way. Seek HR advice. And so this helps to avoid pitfalls, particularly in relation to risks such as discrimination, such as breach of contracts, that type of thing. Again, ensure you're documenting and supporting the decision that you made and be consistent in how you're approaching these matters. Now, this is going to become increasingly more important because of significant changes expected from January next year. You may or may not be aware already, but the current proposals are the qualifying period for a basic unfair dismissal claim will reduce from 2 years, which is what it is now, to 6 months. And also that the statutory cap on compensation for unfair dismissal will be removed. So reduced qualifying period, i.e. people can bring an unfair dismissal claim much, much sooner than they currently can, and the removal of that statutory cap on compensation. So this means that when you take on any new recruits now, they may be protected from unfair dismissal once they reach 6 months service. This is because the legislation impacts all employees, current and future, when it comes into play in January. To make that clearer, because I know it's not always, if you were to take somebody on today, for example, on the 24th of July, they will have protection from unfair dismissal come the 24th of January 2027, because this new legislation comes into play on the 1st of January and it impacts all future and current employees. So it's important now to be looking at your recruitment process and making sure that you put steps in place to ensure that you are getting the right people in from the offset. So last few minutes of the part of the session then, and let's talk about what we can do to build a more positive culture. So again, use your chat box and please feel free to sort of share any ideas or suggestions that you can have in terms of ways that a positive culture can be built. I think we're all aware that it doesn't just happen through policies alone. It comes from consistent leadership behaviours. And a couple of things to ask yourself include, do staff know what's expected of them? Do they receive feedback? Do they feel recognised? Ask the staff rewarded for a job well done. Do you celebrate success? Do you celebrate your wins? That's really, really important, really easy, positive step to help improve workplace culture, celebrating those successes, celebrating those people that go above and beyond every day. Do people feel safe raising concerns? Are standards applied consistently to everyone? Managers do influence that culture every day through the conversations that they're having, but also through the conversations that they're avoiding. And also if managers aren't following their company procedures themselves, perhaps, or, communicating in a respectful way, or even meeting their own sort of targets, then they're never going to be able to set the standard for the rest of the team. So let's say, lead by example, communicate consistently, recognise that good performance, challenge poor behaviours early, hold regular discussions, regular supervisions, listen and act on feedback, support wellbeing, celebrate success, apply standards consistently. Few final thoughts then, just to summarise from me. Healthy nursery or early years setting culture, it doesn't happen by chance. It's intentional. It's built through intentional leadership. Recognise the warning signs early, recruit carefully, never compromise on safe recruitment, use probationary periods and informal management discussions proactively and early to address concerns before they escalate. And don't be afraid to make difficult decisions where somebody's not the right fit. So by acting early and consistently, you're protecting your staff, children, reputation and your organisation as well. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Sorry, I just realised I didn't put I was on mute. So thank you, Rachel. Yeah, so while everyone's getting their questions together, I'm going to hand over to Sarah from PeopleBunch. So Sarah can help us see how PeopleBunch can help us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jared. I'm going to share my screen and take you through to the dashboard. Bear with me 1 minute. Okay, you should be able to see my dashboard. So this is the dashboard of PeopleBunch. On here, you can get various reports, but the ones I've got up at the moment are my joiners and leavers. I've got 2 nurseries on here. So I've got nursery 1, joiners and leavers. You can see their recruitment and retention over the last few months hasn't been great. And I've got another one, PeopleBunch 2. Their recruitment and retention is pretty good. I've also got leave requests. Leave requests is in sickness, other leave, or anything except annual leave is included in this graph. As you can see, my second nursery has got quite a low level of leave requests. However, my first nursery has got a lot of leave requests, indicating, as Rachel said, there could be an issue. I'm then going to scroll down to my final graph, which is my leave requests, and you can search by person. So I'm going to tell you the story of Ross this morning. So Ross started, he had very little leave, and all of a sudden in January, his leave started to increase quite considerably. So I'm going to take you through to Ross's file and explain what's happened. So if I click on Ross, I've made some informal observations from January regarding Ross because of his absence. So the first one at the end of January, he's been absent twice this month, no previous absences, and he seems a bit quieter than he was. I've recorded it as a conduct because obviously it is a conduct issue, absences, and of low concern, and I've logged it only. However, in February, Ross was absent 4 times in the month. Doesn't seem to be as enthusiastic. I spoke to Ross and he says like he's not fitting in and he's being left out of lunch plans and things like that. Again, it's still conduct because he's been absent 4 times in 1 month. Increased it to medium concern and had a verbal check-in, which is when he gave me his feedback. The next month, however, I changed it to a well-being informal observation. He's only been absent once, but he's now falling behind on his work. He's also his next steps for his children. I've spoke to him during his supervisions and he said he's feeling like he doesn't belong. And he named 3 nursery members, one in particular who's making him feel like this. So again, I've checked in for the next month with a wellbeing meeting. He's had 2 absences. I asked him why he still hasn't completed his next steps. He said he's made to do all the cleaning and tidying in the room by the room leader. So he has absolutely no spare time. At this point, management have stepped in and they've spoken to the room leader, again, informal observations, and requested that they put a rota into the room so everybody has their own tasks and the tasks are evenly distributed amongst the team. So the next month, Ross only has 1 absence, and the fact that we've asked to make a room rota of jobs, he feels a lot better because he's not always clearing up and he's had time to do his next steps. So things are becoming positive, but it's still well-being checking on Ross and how he's doing. In June, he's not been absent at all. It shows that the rota's working and the room leader's been spoken to, and it was also made very clear to the room leader that kind of behaviour will not be tolerated within the nursery. So the signs of toxic culture creeping in has been recognised very quickly and dealt with very quickly by the manager to ensure that Ross is now absolutely fine, he's happy, and he's got no more concerns. To back all this up, we do hold professional development on here as well. So we've got the induction, the probations, and all of Ross's supervisions, which all detail the concerns. We also upload the supervisions from the pathways section, which are here. This one that I've got on here is here, so it gives you what is reviewed. So review of reported performance, quality of teaching, roles and duties, personal wellbeing and reflection and summary. All of these are stored within the platform as well. So if we go back, just to summarise, we noticed the absences of Ross increasing over time. We dealt with the absences of Ross increasing over time, and we saved Ross from being possibly dismissed because of a toxic culture, because he wasn't able to concentrate on his work and he just wanted to get on. Previously, he was a good worker with no issues at all. If we also look at the nursery's absences in general, we can also see that since we addressed the situation, the absences in general have gone down within the nursery. So that is how PeopleBunch will support you with your toxic culture. If you would like to know more, you can scan the QR code. You can contact us at hello@peoplebunch.com, or you can go onto our website and see how we can support you with your nursery.
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for that.
All right.
Okay. So I have some questions that people have asked before the HR event anyway. So I'll start with those first. A person here was talking about policies from templates. Using templates from HR companies or different places, is that good enough, or should they be bespoke?
So my view on this is that they need to be tailored to your setting. Templates can be a good starting point, but they should go no further than that. They are helpful in that respect, but you want to ensure that they reflect your setting, your needs, the size of your organisation as well. You want to make sure that they're clear and they're jargon free, and that they're not creating any confusion in that respect. Also, you want to be clear in terms of what policies you actually need. You could have hundreds and hundreds of policies if you wanted to. There are so many out there, but it's about thinking about what you actually need legally, and then on top of that, what is going to be helpful and beneficial for your setting. So yeah, it needs to go further than simply having templates in place to actually really make it so they're a benefit to your business. And you want to keep them under review as well, because the legislation is changing all of the time, and we have had significant changes this year. In April, we're expecting more in October, and then there's more to come in January. So if you haven't had your policies looked at in the past 12 months, they are out of date now. So it's always important to keep on top of them and keep them looked over. Otherwise, they can end up being actually, potentially a little bit harmful as well.
Okay. Staff retention. So staff retention in our world is very interesting. It's a very interesting time with staff retention. So how could we increase staff retention?
So there are a few different things that we can look at, and there's two sides of this. There's the positive steps that we can take regarding engagement, but then there's also the more reactive steps that we need to take. I think, as Sarah quite rightly pointed out, in respect of managing those issues as and when they arise, so they don't have a knock-on impact on everyone else. There's a few really simple things. I could talk about this one for ages, and I won't. A few really simple things that can help. Setting the bar and setting the standards expected from the very beginning. Super simple, super easy. You just need to get in the flow of what good looks like for your setting. And then importantly, how employees can contribute towards that. You want good, fair, open communication. So utilize them, them one-to-ones as we discussed, but also think about your team meetings as well and how they can be utilized effectively. I sometimes see these team meetings become a bit of a slanging match, becoming a bit of, a source pot for negativity. You want a really clear set agenda in those types of meetings. You want to, what do we need to achieve? How do we need to achieve it? If there are issues, how do we resolve them? So really sort of structured agendas and meetings in that respect. And then think about what staff wellbeing. What can we do to help support our staff and our team members? How can we increase that positive wellbeing at work? And how can we really, reward staff for the good work that they do and celebrate the successes in our settings, even if they only seem small. Celebrate them anyway, because it can have a real positive impact.
Okay. Some people have said that supervisions they find a bit tricky. They don't know what to talk about in supervisions. So how should we look at supervisions, please?
So you want a set structure for them, and you want to be consistent with them as well. So you want to apply the same structure to every person. They might have slightly different roles, so questions might tweak slightly, but ultimately the general principles should be the same throughout. They should be held consistently as well. And I know that it can be difficult, and I know with ratios as well, there may be times where we do inevitably have to move and swap these meetings around, which is fine. But the important thing is that they happen as closely as possible as to when they should happen, and that they're not missed altogether. So you've got that consistent opportunity to sit down with your team member, and your team member's got that consistent opportunity to raise any issues or concerns. Any targets or objectives set should be clear. They should be measurable, and they should have a time limit on them. They don't go on indefinitely. And you should also discuss, again, support is a key part of this. How can we help you reach this goal? What additional support do you need? You might not have all the answers, and you might not be able to provide everything that they're asking for. But if you're having a discussion around that, 9 times out of 10, there's going to be something that can be done somewhere to help support that. So yeah, clarity, consistency, and agreeing those targets with that team member to ensure that they are achieved.
And what sort of frequency should we have? Is there any guidelines on that, or is it up?
So no, certainly from an employment law perspective, there's no set guidelines, and different businesses do manage them in different ways. I'm going to say it depends a little bit in terms of the resources available for you in respect of this. But as a bare minimum, I would suggest you want to be sitting down with every member of staff at least once a quarter, perhaps even more than that, to try and understand what's going on in your team. The more often, the better, ultimately.
Clear expectations. So I've got a question here around KPIs. So they're interested in knowing what sort of KPIs should we be looking at to prevent anything bad happening, or in this case, a toxic culture.
Okay. So you're going to want KPIs around attendance and timekeeping, but be very, very mindful in terms of attendance, the impact of any disabilities that might have on an individual. We might need to adjust and allow additional flexibility for employees with disabilities. So although it will form a part of it, use attendance cautiously. with timekeeping being a focus in that respect. You want to build in some tasks and objectives to meet your safeguarding obligations. Ultimately, you're going to want to build some things in around, I suppose, childcare routine, perhaps parent expectations, feedback to parents. They should be really tailored actually to the role and quite practical in that respect, because if we're being really practical and we've got clear expectations for the job and the role, everybody knows where they stand and what they should be doing. That's going to contribute towards that more positive culture. And then you can have your wider target pieces, maybe just one or two around that, to say, I want you to think about, and you tell me, speak to your team members, perhaps even after this seminar this morning, what do you think that we could do to improve the culture within our setting? Get that feedback from them, and then perhaps that can be built in as well in that respect. Teamwork is another one in there as well, and how we're raising and communicating issues. We want people to raise issues or communicate anything really sooner rather than later. So we want to be encouraging people to do that early, but in a respectful manner and in the right place. If you've got a concern, where do you go? Do you sit and do you gossip about it in the lunchroom with your colleagues, or do you flag it immediately to a senior member of staff and have an open discussion with them around what can be done to resolve it? So you're encouraging that early conversation as well.
I've got a question here for Sarah. Sarah, do you do safer recruitment?
Yep, absolutely we do. We go from interview stage, recording all those interview notes, up to, as Rachel said, offering job descriptions out, making sure we got the offer letters out, the acceptance letters. All of these are stored within the platform, as well as all the DBS details and the references, all stored within the platform. We have a RAG rating to make sure that all of these documents are being checked off as you go along. Ongoing CPD, we have training on the platform, and obviously, as I showed you, the supervisions, the inductions, the probations, the whole story of the employee's journey is all stored within the platform. I'm going to add the link now to the chat, which takes you directly to our people management suite. So if you want to take a look, feel free to click on the link.
Thank you. I've actually got an interesting one here. I find it interesting about promoting people. How do we know when people are actually ready to be promoted? Because I've had this in the past where we've promoted people and they were really great practitioners, and then they've gone into a role and now the standards have dropped and you're in a bit of a pickle. So how do we protect against that?
Yeah, so that really links back into your earlier proactive steps. So firstly, being really clear in terms of job descriptions and job specifications for each role and each stage, if you like, within that business. And then you can compare your current member of staff to that personal specification, and you'll be able to establish, by already having that in place, where they are strong and where they may need additional support and additional help. You also probably want to do, proper interview process with them as well, to ask them the types of questions around teamwork, around how they will manage conflict, how they will manage difficult conversations amongst staff, and get them thinking about that aspect of the role. Because a promotion's great, it sounds fantastic until you're actually doing the job, doesn't it? And you realise what it actually entails, and you might not be so keen. So actually being really open and honest with the person around what the expectations are and some of the difficult conversations they may face can help in that respect as well. So yeah, really clear in terms of what that process looks like, the specification, the job description, and where the gaps are for that individual. Your earlier steps around your supervisions and your one-to-ones as well will help, because that they should be a two-way street. You should be helping that person to grow in their role and to develop the additional skills that they need. And if at them early stages they're showing a real keenness that they want to progress, and that they want to sort of build a real career with you, we should be looking at that and supporting that very early on, and helping them and guiding them and giving them the tools. So then when the promotion opportunity comes along, they're in the best possible opportunity to be able to give that a real good go. And then when you actually do promote them, I would subject that to, we call it a trial period. Be careful with terminology. It's not necessarily a probationary period as such, because they're already employed, they've already passed their probationary period, but you can implement a 3 or 6 month trial where, again, very clear and specific objectives would be set with them to meet. And if they pass those objectives, then they retain, they stay in that role. If not, they will, move back into their practitioner role. But that's a really clear, transparent process from the offset. And that's something that you would apply equally across the board anyway. So yeah, there's a few different things you can do there to help them prepare, give them best opportunity for success, but also make sure that you are monitoring them carefully when they're in that role to ensure that they are the right fit, because the last thing you want to do is potentially lose a really good practitioner because they've been placed in a role which actually wasn't for them.
Makes a lot of sense. I didn't, that trial period, that sounds like a really, really good idea. What sort of length is ideal of that trial period?
3 months, I would say. Again, there's no hard and fast rule. There's no legislative requirement around it. I would say typically 3 months initially will give you a really good go and give the individual a really good go. But allow yourself the flexibility. That can be subject to an extension, for example, of a further 6 weeks or a further 3 months even. No more than 6 months in total. I think if you can't figure out whether or not they're good for the job in 6 months, then they're probably not. So don't, like the theme of today is, don't drag these things on any longer than necessary. But yes, 3 months initially, potentially an extension, no more than 6 is my view on it. Yeah.
I've got a question here, which is, what if one of the SLT senior leadership team members is making work difficult for the staff? What if it's
how would you handle that then as a manager? Okay, so first you're going to want to do some investigating there. Has somebody said that they've made it difficult, or have you identified that yourself? So if someone said they've made it difficult, you need to speak with them, that person, and understand what their concerns are specifically. If you've identified it, you want to be, putting together what you've identified and why. What have they done, and why do you think that that's made that difficult? Get the information together so you're going in sort of fully informed. And then you're going to have to raise it with a member of the senior leadership team. I think it's the only way. I've identified these concerns. These concerns have been brought to my attention. I'm not suggesting that this is the case currently. I just want to understand your views on this. I want to understand what's going on. Is there anything we need to be aware of? How can we help? What the situation is, and have that discussion with them. And ultimately, first step would be to see what they say and see how they respond to that, because that is going to guide how you then manage that from there, depending on how they respond. But yeah, don't sit on it, address it, but make sure you've got your facts and information correct beforehand. Because if you don't, that could be quite damaging.
Okay. I've got quite a practical one here, it looks like. Staff acknowledgement. So there's different ways to acknowledge staff, and in early years we have things like Pizza Friday and things like that.
Yeah.
What do you find works?
Oh, so you know what, the really simple thing is what seem to work best. So I don't know if this will apply to your setting. It might do in some ways or others, but I work with a different business, and they use like Slack, or they use another like chat communication. And whenever anybody does a good job or has a success, they post it on there, and everybody goes, well done, that's brilliant. Or whenever there's a real big win in that business, it's shared for everyone. So it's I suppose that the key is sharing that information and sharing those day-to-day wins to celebrate that success with them. And what else can people do? Yeah, the pizzas and the getting together and anything team building is always going to be really, really good. But I think the key really is just treating each other with respect, day to day. And if somebody asks for some support, some help, some guidance, be there and provide it. It's that type of real, genuine care and consideration for others that's going to build your culture and build your team a lot more than a Pizza Friday would, for example. So yeah, it's what you do, it's how you respond, and it's how you act every single day. And people look to managers, don't they? They look to leaders, and they follow our guidance in that respect.
As we're coming towards the end, I thought I'll ask you an open question, which was, is there any hints, tips, or pitfalls that you frequently come across from a HR professional, that you could let us know?
Yes. So pitfalls are not using probationary periods to their full potential. and people leaving it till like 2 weeks before the end of the probationary period before they're deciding that somebody's not right and then wanting to potentially dismiss them, and that person's then going into that discussion without a clue that they're underperforming or that they're not doing what they're supposed to do, which then makes for a really difficult conversation. So yeah, pitfall is not having early discussions soon or and frequently to allow matters to be addressed, or at least bring issues to people's attention so they can do something about it. Another pitfall I think I touched upon was around managing sickness absence. So not perhaps being consistent, I think, is a first one around sickness absence. With, in one setting, so many absences are allowed, but then in other settings, depending on who the manager is at that place, they're dealing with it more regularly or less regular, whatever the case may be. There's not consistency across the different settings in terms of how it's managed, which then creates bad feeling and unfairness. It's also looking around sickness absence. The other point to this is the disability point. So not identifying patterns or trends in absences that could potentially bring a bigger issue to our attention that we could actually maybe just either deal with rather than let it continue, or address and support with as well. If an employee, just to touch up on that a little bit further, if you weren't aware, so if an employee has a disability, then there is a legal obligation to make reasonable adjustments to support them in their role. And sometimes a bit of a pitfall is we're perhaps potentially aware of that, but we don't want to ask the question or deal with it because then we're going to have to make the adjustments. And the thought process is, well, if we don't know, we can't do anything about it. But 9 times out of 10, a tribunal will look at that person's like attendance. They will look at the the welfare discussions and the sort of the absence of things that haven't happened, and they will use that to determine, well, you didn't know, but you should have done. So why didn't you do anything about it? So actually tackling, again, it's a theme, isn't it, on those types of things, so that they can get support in place, and then utilize additional expertise and support as well. If you're unsure of anything, or you're not confident that you're going down the right path, rather than wait until things get very serious before bringing in extra help from a HR perspective, just have a quick call with somebody just early on and just get a bit of early guidance, because that can save you a huge headache as well. Final point is like documentation. It can be so easy to forget or do really rough, like notes that we read back on and we think, I don't even know what I was talking about there, not making sense. So do just spend a little bit of time to make sure that you are, just documenting the stop checks and the little conversations that you're having. It will help you for future conversations. And then in a worst case scenario, if it was to get contentious, if it was to litigate, that's your evidence that you've done everything that you could have and should have done in that scenario, to support that person.
Okay. And then I go to if there's any more questions, feel free to add them in now, because we're coming towards the end. But I guess because you've been talking about culture quite a lot, and even that word culture, it's got so many interpretations. If you could help us just for the final sort of questions, what is culture? What is behavior? How do we actually be proactive and make sure our culture is strong?
Yeah, culture is that feeling that you get when you walk through the door and you feel like you belong. You feel safe, you feel respected, and you feel that when you raise concerns that they will be addressed. You feel supported and you feel part of a team. It's a feeling, it's culture, and it's not something that can be turned on overnight. It's something that only happens where every single person is, out of everything they do, focusing on creating that environment every single day in terms of how they interact with others, and how they respond to matters or how they don't respond to matters, as the case may be, how they're supporting their team overall, and how everyone's actually really working together to strive to provide the best possible experience for the children and to build parent confidence as well. So it's built, there's no one thing you can do, it's built into every single aspect of how you're leading that setting ultimately, and you're going to continually work and build towards that.
Okay, I've got one more question. This one is actually to Sarah. Sarah, does PeopleBunch have the Bradford factor?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It measures the Bradford factor. People can see their own Bradford factor as well, because everyone has their own individual leave form where they record their leave. They can see all the leave they've had, annual leave, sick leave, other leave, whatever leave it might be, and it records the Bradford. It also tells them why they've got that Bradford score, so it gives them the calculation. So it's complete transparency for both the managers and for the staff as well.
Thank you. I have come to an end on my questions. So we will start wrapping up now. So I would like to say a big thank you to Rachel. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to Sarah for taking us through Ross's journey. And we have more events that will be coming up. They will be people management focused, or HR, as well as Ofsted, and as well as regulations, early years regulations. So please make sure that you have a look at our website, peoplebunch.com, and have a look at the events and just sign up as we go. Great. So I hope everyone has a lovely morning. Thank you so much for everyone turning up and spending your morning with us, because I know your time is precious. So I hope this was valuable. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.